of you here in New York and also to those of you who are watching on live stream, thank you so much for being here. Before we do anything else, please introduce yourselves to the people who are around you, to your right and to your left and in front of you and behind you. Tonight we will be celebrating the life and honoring the memory of Martin Luther King Jr. And we have two musical presentations that are part of this. And the first one was gifted to us by Marble Collegiate, our hosts here. Please join with me in welcoming Shamira Mighty.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, no more weeping, no more weeping over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, no more worry, no more worry, no more worry over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Shamira Mighty, everyone. Shamira Mighty. Thank you so much. Yeah, too bad you can't sing. That was just magnificent, Shamira, and we know who was looking down on that. Extremely happy and honored. So magnificent, thank you. All right, please join with me. Let's all take a deep breath. We see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light. We watch this light as it begins to grow, larger and larger, until now it covers the entire inner vision of our mind. We see for ourselves within this light a beautiful temple. We see a garden that surrounds the temple and a body of water that flows through the garden. we see that the inside of the temple is lit by this same beautiful golden light. And here we are. For we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of God. And it is to him that we devote our time together and our relationships to one another. And we pray that his most Holy Spirit be upon us. And may we thus be lifted above and beyond the sorrows and the limitations and the fears of this world to the endless love and peace that lay beyond. And so it is. Together, we all say, amen. Yesterday was officially the holiday, Martin Luther King's birthday. For those of you who are too young to remember, the official holiday, which was signed into law in 1983, took several years to pass. It wasn't something that happened quickly. It wasn't something that happened easily. Coretta Scott King was pivotal. If Mrs. King had not been so active and persevering as she was, it would not have occurred. It was first introduced in 1979, and certain states, certain representatives kept voting against it. And they just kept on, they kept on. I remember Stevie Wonder was very much a part of the effort. They kept doing these concerts. John Conyers, who recently left Congress, was very active. John Lewis, I mean, it was quite a process. And then when it had been turned down in Congress, and some of you, I'm sure, know the song Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday to Ya. That was for Dr. King. And then there were enough signatures, and finally it was passed into law. I remember at the time myself wondering why his birthday being celebrated was of itself such a big deal. But I think in the years past, since then, it's very obvious why making his birthday a holiday is such a big deal. Because it's one day of the year that we all stop to think about him, to think about what he stood for. But also, it's very easy, particularly once people have died, once years have gone by, to start revising history. And so I think that it serves us and serves the country, and I think serves the memory of Dr. King, that we be as deep in our appreciation of what all that was about as we might be. I know every day when it's Dr. King's birthday, and today was no exception, there are a lot of ways in which people commemorate his life and his service. And one of the things that you hear about a lot, I've heard a lot about this in the last few years, and today was no exception, people, quote unquote, doing service. People working with the homeless, or people working with poverty organizations or something. Sounds good, right? It is almost an insult. Because Dr. King was about something much more inconvenient to the system than just helping the poor on any given day. The status quo does not care if on any given day you help the poor. What Dr. King was about was challenging the underlying forces that make all that poverty inevitable. And that's extremely important, I think, that we remember that. To have a day that people just go work on a food line or do some individual act of service, and then the White House has a proclamation, is part of the whitewashing, a part of the revisionism of history that those of us who care deeply about these issues want to make sure that we avoid. So, you know, there's a book called Testament of Hope, and Testament of Hope is the collected writings and speeches of Dr. King. It's meant a lot to me for many, many years, and it's one of those books that you can just open up anywhere. You open up anywhere and you learn so much. Of course, his eloquence, he was a philosopher, and he was a deep political thinker, spiritual thinker. You can pick up the book anywhere, but the one, obviously, piece of his writing that is considered, and I think should be considered, really one of the literary masterpieces in a way of the 20th century was his letter from the Birmingham jail. And you probably have heard it read before. I think that it can never get old because there is so much there that not only teaches us about his time and his conditions, but also teaches us about ours. You know, Dr. King was only 39 years old when he died. Bobby Kennedy was only 43. JFK was 44. John Lennon was 40. So many times when these geniuses among us die, and they die so young, part of the tragedy is what we will never have experienced. The gifts that we will never receive from them because they were taken from us so young. And for those of us who lived through that time, part of what makes, I often say at these times that usually when someone that you love dies, every year it gets easier. But with the passing of Dr. King, Bobby Kennedy, and others, it just gets worse. Because everything we feared would happen has happened. And yet, now, Dr. King would be, had he lived, 89 years old. So for many years, it was about our having to somehow try to compensate for the life force that was not among us, thinking in terms of what it might have meant. But now, even had he lived, he would be earning a well-deserved rest. And I think it is important for all of us to remember that this is not then, this is now. And generations come and generations go. We all remember Dr. King for having had a dream. But I think we miss a greater point of his life if we only think in terms of the fact he had a dream. It's not enough to dream. It's what he did. It was not just Dr. King's dream that we want to remember on a day like today. It was Dr. King's courage. It was not just what he dreamed, it was what he did to make that dream a reality, not only for his children, but for millions of children continuing even today. So before I read from this abridged version of the letter from a Birmingham jail, let's just go over a little bit of the history. There were marches in Birmingham, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which he was the head, and that was centered in Atlanta, but there were many affiliates, there were 85 affiliates. They had come in and they were part of the march. And during that march, Dr. King was jailed. Now, first of all, let's just remember this. He's writing this from a jail, okay? He's writing this letter as a black man in a Birmingham jail during segregation. And when you watch documentaries, you read about, Bobby Kennedy on the phone, you bastards better not touch him. Nobody knew what was going to happen. So anything that you might think of in terms of dangers today, a black man might experience or anyone might experience in jail, think that Dr. King being in a Birmingham jail, right, in 1963. They had been jailed because the march was considered illegal. Now, there was a letter that was put out, and there were, I think, 9 clergy people. And these clergy people said in this public letter, we appreciate what this movement stands for, but this march was illegal. And you must work within the system. And you must work according to the laws, and you must negotiate. We do not approve of the means that you are using of civil disobedience because the march had been declared illegal. Are you with me so far? So this is the letter that Dr. King wrote. Many of the quotes, basically my point here is that, we all put Dr. King memes on Instagram on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And we want to be careful here. And a lot of the quotes that are on these memes that are so famous do come from the letter from a Birmingham jail. Some of his most famous quotes are in here. But we want to remember the historical circumstances that make it so potent, including the dangers that were faced by the people who were resisting segregation at that time, and even the specific dangers that were being faced by Dr. King specifically, or at least theoretically, while he was in that jail. He was writing this letter in response to the letter that had been made public from the clergymen saying that they did not support the illegal means by which they were resisting segregation. My dear fellow clergymen, this was written on April 16th, 1963. Now, let's put this a little bit in context, too. So he died in 1968. He was 39. This was 1963. He's 34 years old. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling our present activities, quote, unwise and untimely, unquote. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give you the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the argument of quote-unquote outsiders coming in. And then he goes on to talk about how the Southern Christian Leadership Conference has an organization that is headquartered in Atlanta, but it has 85 affiliate organizations. The local affiliate in Birmingham had invited them to come to Birmingham to engage in nonviolent direct action. If that was deemed necessary, he said, we readily consented. He says, but more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Now, this is the beginning of one of the main principles of Dr. King, a quote that I'm going to say in a couple of sentences that we all know. But this idea that it's not enough for you to respond to injustice only if it's in your neighborhood. He says, moreover, I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. 1, collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. That's very important. Number 2, negotiation. Number 3, self-purification. And number 4, direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of the country. Its unjust treatment of Negroes in the courts is a notorious reality. There had been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in this nation. These are the hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the political leaders consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community. In these negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as the promise to remove the humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, Reverend Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to call a moratorium on any type of demonstrations. As the weeks and months unfolded, we realized we were the victims of a broken promise. The signs remained. As in so many experiences in the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of deep disappointment settled upon us. So we had no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. We were not unmindful of the difficulties involved. So we decided to go through the process of purification. We started having workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked ourselves the questions: are you able to accept the blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeals of jail? Now, what we're going to be talking about here tonight is the idea of courage. Nobody got to sit behind their computer screen and just sign a petition, put a meme on Instagram. They sent dogs after these people, fire hoses. So the whole point of nonviolent action was, if they start beating us with batons, will we not retaliate? He goes on, he says, you may well ask, what direct action? Why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without legal and nonviolent pressure. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups, this is once again one of the most famous of the lines, just as that paragraph about mutuality and the network of mutuality and interrelatedness that I already read is one of the most famous pieces, that injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. This is another one of the most famous and I think eternally potent messages of the letter from Birmingham jail. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups are more immoral than individuals. Now that's a big deal. Dr. King said repeatedly that the U.S. Congress was less compassionate than the American people. And that's why when you talk about something like just working in a bread line today, nobody's questioning the decency of individuals. The issue of Dr. King is not about individual transformation. It is about challenging the social and economic and political forces which hold people down. And that, if we miss that, then not only are we missing the whole point of why we honor Dr. King, but I think we're missing something very important for our day. He says, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. You know, that's another thing. You know, he was a very controversial character during his time, and he's been now seen as this kind of like this sort of through soft light. That was radical then, and it's radical now. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I've never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well-timed, because that's what everybody was saying to him. Your timing's not good. This is the incrementalist argument. Just take little baby steps. But Dr. King said if you take little baby steps, then what happens is that the system will co-opt everything that you're about, and you'll find that you're not really moving forward. The system is just talking different, right? Like when you hear all these oil and gas companies talk about how environmentally correct they are and everything they're doing for the environment. And some of them are in some ways, don't get me wrong, but in general, that's not what's going on here. It's that the language of environmentalism has been co-opted by some of the worst perpetrators against environmental justice. It must be demanded. Frankly, I've never yet engaged, he says, in a direct action movement that was well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has been advertised on television, and see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white men and colored, when your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and when your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs., when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying the others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the brat to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree that with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. What is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and awful. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law as would the rabid segregationists. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Of course, there's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is in the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. In spite of my shattered dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership in the community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern serve as the channel through which our just grievances could get to the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. I have heard numerous religious leaders of the South call upon their worshipers to comply with a desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because integration is morally right and the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and merely mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which made a strange distinction between body and soul, the sacred and the secular. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all of their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr. You know, as Gail and I have discussed, Norman Vincent Peale, who was the minister here at this church and who did give us so much in terms of positive thinking, et cetera, was actually one of those white ministers who was resistant to the cause of integration, and very much, it's important that we face these things and know some of these things as they occurred. Once again, it was his mix of philosophy and personal courage that gives a letter like that such moral authority. And like I said, for us to just say, oh, it's Martin Luther King Day, and not deal with so much of what is going on today is, I believe, to do a disservice to the memory. In 1965, that letter was written in 1963. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson did sign the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act was one of the primary essential core pieces of the civil rights movement. Because what happened after the Civil War is that particularly in 9 southern states, they would say to black people, okay, well, of course you can vote. I tell you what you do, stand on your left foot and read the Constitution backwards by memory, and then you can vote. Those were the kinds of things that they did to deny people the right to vote. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and guess what happened in 2015, ladies and gentlemen? In 2015, our Supreme Court started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act. And it was a very contentious decision, once again, 5-4. For any of you who thought that voting for president on the basis of who was going to get in the Supreme Court was beneath you, this is why this stuff matters. And so in 2015, with John Roberts, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, they took away pieces of the Voting Rights Act, and John Roberts, who wrote the main decision, said, well, we have to go with the circumstances that are true today. We don't have those problems today. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her very vigorous dissent, said, no, we don't have first-generation barriers, we have second-generation barriers. And big surprise, they're back. And this is what gerrymandering, et cetera, are. As soon as that decision was passed, states all over the place started coming up with things, with plans that had been outlawed by the Voting Rights Act. So this is so extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, because when we know history, we recognize certain elements that if we aren't, which will always return if we are not vigilant in their replacement. You know, any addict knows. You don't get to say, okay, if you're really an addict and you're not going to drink anymore, or you're not going to take drugs anymore, or you're not going to overeat anymore immoderately, whatever that is, you can't just say, I'm not going to do that anymore. You have to commit to your sobriety. So what's happened in America is, in so many ways, we naively, and it was so easy to distract us, we're all so distracted, we thought these things were handled. Oh yeah, the Civil Rights Act, so these things were handled. There was the abolition of slavery, and there was the Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Movement, and that, of course, is just one piece of the larger issues of democracy and the assaults on democracy. Democracy is, in fact, a relationship that you have to tend, just like you have a marriage or a love affair or a relationship with anyone in your life. You can't take people for granted, and you can't take freedom for granted, and you can't take democracy for granted. So when it comes, of course, to the issues of race in America, and I'm not saying some good things have not occurred. I'm not saying improvements have not been made, and I think that it's showing a dishonor not only to Martin Luther King, but to all of our ancestors to fail to recognize the improvements that have occurred. I remember when I was a little girl, because I grew up in Houston, and I remember at the medical Towers building, which is still there in Houston, where we would go to the doctor. I remember asking my mother why there was a sign between the elevators that said colored bathrooms downstairs. I mean, I remember that in my lifetime. So there are many things that certainly have improved, but there are many ways in which a moral dysfunction is like a physical disease. If you don't cut it out at its cause, it just morphs into another symptom. And so now with things like the voting suppression, so the president tried that, with the Voting Fraud Commission when there's like practically zero evidence of voting fraud. So we all know what that was about. But now they're still working on that voter suppression, voter fraud thing. This is extremely important. This is as important as our time, as these issues were as important in Martin Luther King's time. And there's a gentleman named Ari Berman that I highly recommend that you read and be aware of his work, because voter suppression is the new attack. Of course, if you start suppressing votes, there are so many ways that these things just morph into different symptoms. But once again, even though some of the actual circumstances are different, obviously, we no longer have institutionalized segregation. But then what would Dr. King say about mass incarceration and so forth? What would he say about many of the circumstances we have? But once again, he would be 89 years old. Dr. King, even if he were alive, he would have earned the right to rest. The issue is on us now. And if all we're doing on Martin Luther King Day is going rah, 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 and how wonderful, and do an act of service, then once again, we're missing the point. Ever since we have the undue influence of money that we have on our political system, we have these two major political parties, and one doesn't even pretend it's not acting at the behest of the corporate forces whose money can override genuine advocacy for the American people. But too many times that other party wrings its hands and understands your pain and does what it does on the periphery to ameliorate the pain, but still does not address those underlying forces that make all that pain inevitable. That was Dr. King. It's not enough to just write those beautiful words. He didn't just write those beautiful words, he wrote them from jail. And today, I remember the deaths of Martin Luther King. I remember the death of Bobby Kennedy. And most importantly, I remember the deaths of those students at Kent State. Because to have lived at a time, even though I was young, and when you're young, you feel these things. Like when you're a teenager, look how mature these kids are. Those of us who have kids who are 11 and 12, they know what's going on. And to have people in our midst like Dr. King and like Bobby Kennedy who spoke these philosophical dreams in actual political action, that's what we had. We had people who were laying it down philosophically, spiritually, morally, within the larger political structure. But when those people were shot and killed in front of our eyes, there was a very loud unspoken message that went out to everyone. And it didn't need to be articulated verbally, it was clear. And that was that we would now leave the public sector alone, leave it to whoever it is that wants it so bad that clearly they're willing to kill in order to control it. You can do whatever you want in the private sector, but leave the public sector alone. And they didn't have to say it, the message was clear, or we might kill you too. And that is what has happened to us. we put our energy, we put our genius, we put our talents in the private sector. You can make your dreams come true, you can have a successful business, and you can make money, and you can get the love that you want. This is not liberation, this is complete co-opting. And so what's happened in the last year is that people are like, whoa, what's happened? Because we took our eye off that ball because we were told to. And we did as we were told. And now it's, I think, already an activation in our generation. And by generation, I mean all of us who are adults at this time, to recognize that it's not enough just for you to be able to have, your particular kingdom. I remember when my first book came out, and I, because of Oprah Winfrey, was very fortunate when that book came out, and I did what a lot of people in America do when you have a book come out that sells that well, you buy a house in Santa Barbara. And one day, with great sadness now for what Santa Barbara and Montecito has been going through, but I remember one of the first days that I was sitting in my new house, on my beautiful couch, on my beautiful rug, looking out my beautiful window at my beautiful swimming pool, and I could almost hear my father's voice, "The bastards got to you, didn't they?" And that's exactly what success in America had given me, the ability to escape. And that's really what America has become, that at the highest level of making it, you're able to escape it. You're able to live in a place where you're not looking at it. I remember once when I lived in Santa Barbara, and I picked up the newspaper one day, and I saw a law that had been passed that you couldn't sit on the sidewalk. And I couldn't understand, why would they pass a law that you can't sit on the sidewalk? And my friend said to me, "Marianne, be real. It's because homeless people are inconvenient to see. So if you pass a law that you can't sit on the sidewalk, who is mainly going to be sitting on the sidewalk? Homeless people. And that's what the system does. Americans are decent people. Martin Luther King was always pointing that out. As individuals, we're decent. So you make the suffering, you make sure it's on the other side of town. Or you make sure it's on the other side of the world. And then it's very, very easy to put your blinders on. Well, that only works so long, doesn't it? And for that matter, there is no amount of money that anybody can make that can protect us or our children from the devastating consequences that will occur if we don't put the real forces of democracy back on track in the ways that many of us know they need to be put back on track right now. So I think that on a day like today, when we are remembering Dr. King, let us refuse to be co-opted by the whitewashed version. And I don't mean that from any kind of color pun. I mean it just from the sense of how we revise history and make it all soft and sweet. Those famous words in the letter from a Birmingham jail, where he spoke of the actual conditions that people were living in. It is important for us to remember that even though great strides have been made in certain ways, we still have some serious issues of economic and social and political injustice in our country. It's not like everything's been fixed. And even when certain things are quote unquote fixed, they can be removed, they can be chipped at. We not only have that voting rights limitation on the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court in 2015, we have things that are occurring with the current Department of Justice right now. And for me, in the work that I do, one of the reasons why Martin Luther King matters so much is because this idea of people in positions of spiritual and religious leadership sitting on the sidelines, it's such a condemnation. It was such a condemnation by Dr. King of those who would sit on the sidelines. And he pointed out there, and I as a Jew had been very aware of it, those who just stood there while the Jews were being taken in cattle cars and didn't say anything, and all the ministers who stood there and didn't say anything. All the ministers who didn't talk about slavery in any other terms than, well, it's the law, so it's okay. You look at many people today in America who actually will will support, at least tacitly, indirectly if not directly, laws that perhaps we ourselves would find unjust, saying that the gospel does not deal with collective behavior. And we in the transformational community, in the higher consciousness community, have come up with our own ways to escape any sense of real moral responsibility. You know, all this stuff that too often you see about how spirituality is where the real causal change occurs, but politics is not where it's at. Nobody is saying, I don't think Dr. King was saying, that politics is the vessel of salvation. But he was saying, and I think any of us who actually look will agree, it's not the vessel of salvation, but if we are not careful, it will be the vessel of our destruction. I was just reading today that the government has now passed a plan, $1 trillion over the next 30 years to build more nuclear bombs. We already have 7,000, I think, just in our country alone. And when they did the false alarm the other day in Hawaii, I loved it. They said, go inside the basement. That's going to work. The building will be incinerated. Let's be very clear. Or go to the side of the road. Well, that'll really help. I mean, there are so many ways in which it's not fun today to look at what's really going on in our world any more than it was. But to me, the point is, we have to more than dream. We have to more than visualize. And as you've heard me say before, can't wait for your trauma work to be over before you show up for your country. They were traumatized. You think he wasn't traumatized in that jail cell? You think those people walking across the bridge in Selma weren't traumatized? We are going once again to this amusing ourselves to death. Our courage, the musculature of courage, will wither away if we don't use it. Now, what does that mean you're supposed to do? I have no idea. The Course in Miracles is very clear about that. Each and every one of us are given guidance by the Holy Spirit, our own guidance, as to what to do. But I know one of the things that we are not to do. I have never seen any religious or spiritual path that I've ever read about or heard about or studied that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So do all kinds. If we are living our lives and we are only concerned about manifesting our own dreams, call it whatever you want to call it, but don't call it spiritual. Because there's nothing spiritual about looking away, convenient though it might be, from the suffering of other people. Whether those people are in this country or whether those people are in other countries, that inescapable network of mutuality that Dr. King spoke of in the letter to Birmingham jail is as true today as it was true then. If anything, it is even more true. Dr. King said we're all on the same boat, and if there's a hole on the boat anywhere, we're all going down. And when things happen like the other day, the false alarm, that in fact the bombs were not coming from North Korea. Too bad it wasn't a false alarm when our bombs were coming to Baghdad to rain on people who had done nothing to hurt us, who had nothing to do with 9/11, who even though he killed some of his own people, China's killed people in Tibet, who even if he had had weapons of mass destruction, we do business with countries that have weapons of mass destruction all the time, we acquiesce to that. We put up an argument, but we didn't put up anywhere near the acts of civil disobedience, and what the hell are we doing that might have saved millions of lives? So I think that we are living in a time which is as potent and significant, not just for our country, but for the world, as Dr. King was in his time. We dream. We might not be as articulate as he was. We might not be as brilliant as he was. But that's not even what's lacking. We don't have to ask ourselves, am I as brilliant as Dr. King? We don't have to ask ourselves, am I as articulate as Dr. King? But we do have to ask ourselves, do I have an ounce of the courage that Dr. King had? Enough with the brand protection? Enough with wanting applause? Enough with wanting, particularly among women, you can't be a part of a prophetic voice and be a people pleaser at the same time. And this is not the time of the soloist. And if anything, the 60s taught us, if a political revolutionary era is ushered in, led by soloists, they can shoot the soloists. That's not the zeitgeist of this moment. because it can't shoot a song. This is about all of us. This is not just about brilliant leaders like Dr. King. This is about the brilliant leader in all of us as we follow the brilliant leader in our hearts. We follow the brilliant leader in our hearts and do what we are led to do. I think, if anything, for me, the message of Dr. King Day is, dear God, let me not sit this out. Before we do our meditation, we are going to hear from one of our friends and companions who we hear, I think I see you every week, Dawn, who definitely did not sit this out. You know, Shamira, how old is Shamira? She's 19 years old. Pardon? Just graduated from high school. And it's so beautiful, and it's so beautiful what she has in her cells. And we are happy for her, of course, that she does not have in her actual visceral memory, although I'm sure she has it in her cellular memory, the things of which she so passionately sang. But Don McGrath has a history with Martin Luther King, an actual history with Martin. In 1963, he led a group of college students in Pittsburgh to the March on Washington. The I Have a Dream speech simply lifted us off the ground to our feet, he says, never to be forgotten for a moment. In 1965, I traveled with students of the North to join the Selma Montgomery March. While we were demonstrating outside the office that was not giving us the final parade permit to bring the march right up to the Capitol, there was a raging rainstorm. Almost everyone deserted the lines and ran. I found myself in this raging storm now in the front line. As I turned my head, I discovered I was shoulder to shoulder with Martin. We smiled at each other. A couple of hours went by and we departed. The next day, with the leaders of SNCC, we decided to go to the Capitol to demonstrate in front of Governor George Wallace, who was the premier segregationist governor, Alabama, right? That they were being unfair. There is a Life magazine cover of the Capitol completely surrounded by state police. We sat down on the ground and the city police threw us into paddy wagons and off to Montgomery Jail. After a 7-day hunger strike, we were released. In 2005, 40 years later, I returned to Montgomery for the dedication of the Wall of Tolerance at the Southern Poverty Law Center. At the request of Morris Dees, the most courageous man in America, I sang Abraham, Martin, and John. And in 2015, Congress awarded us a congressional medal to the foot soldiers for justice, Selma to Montgomery Marches, 1965. I sang on Broadway in the 1970s, he said, but singing that song fills me with a beautiful memory of those wonderful men who gave their lives as they tried to make a better life for me and you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was written by our friend, my friend and yours, Don McGrath, and he's going to sing that song for us here tonight. Microphone. You're going to hold it, or okay, come on over. You're going to hold it for him.
Testing. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Martin, this is for you. Has anybody here seen my old friend Abraham? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but it seems the good die young. And I just turned around and he's gone. Anybody here seen my old friend John? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but it seems the good die young. And I just turned around and he's gone. Anybody here seen my old friend Martin? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but it seems the good die young. And I just turned around and he's gone. Didn't you love the things they stood for? Didn't they try to make a better life for you, for me, and we'll be free? Someday soon it's gonna be. Has anybody here seen my old friend Bobby? Can you tell me where he's gone? I think I see him coming up over the hill with Abraham, Martin, and John.
Don McGrath. Thank you. Don McGrath,
Thank you very much.
Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Thank you, Don. And thank you not only for this, but thank you for what you have stood for and continue to mean to all of us. I think, if anything, we realize just living our lives, whether it's in the life of an individual or the life of a nation, life is not just one moment of time. And life doesn't always go in a straight line from this good thing to that good thing to the next best thing. And America is a magnificent storyline of this dichotomy between the highest aspirations and constitutionally given freedoms and the fact that many times we have perpetrated transgression against the very freedoms on which we purport to stand. But every generation lives that contest, ours no less than any other. But there have been those, sometimes I think these days it's so easy to be so angry about the things that America's done wrong that we dishonor our own ancestors by failing to remember that even though we had terrible things in this country, we also had people who ended those terrible things. We had slavery, but then we had abolition. Women did not have the right to vote or own property, but then we had suffrage. There was institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, but then we had the civil rights movement. This is not the first generation of Americans who's lived at a time of some serious stress on our democratic freedoms and institutions. Let's just make sure we're not the first generation to wimp out on the job doing what it will take to put America back on track. We were a country that had slavery, but we also had a country that had abolition. So let's not just identify the problems, let's identify with those who solved those problems. We know what Martin Luther King did in his time. We know what other great heroes have done in their times. We must be a heroic generation. Not just you, not just you, not just me. This is not about the heroic individual, not the moment that we're living in. This is about the rising up of a generation. When we look at World War II, certainly there were people like Franklin Roosevelt who were certainly leaders, but they talk about the generation that fought World War II. So I think on this particular year, Martin Luther King's birthday, has particular relevance and significance as well as poignancy. not just for particular issues of race, not just for particular issues of racial injustice, because Dr. King, he emerged obviously from Black America, and he was addressing issues of Black America, but it is a historical opinion which I agree with myself. Many feel that Dr. King would not have died if he had kept his conversation only to race. It was when he started talking about the Vietnam War, increased militarism, and so forth, that the system had had enough. So, whatever that means to you, I don't know. This is where we go into that sacred place within. For some of us, it's an internal thing. Don't be such a coward. Don't keep your mouth shut. You know, Dr. King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter most. And he said that it's always the right time to do the right thing. So in all of our lives, and usually I know for me it's both and. It's things I have to change on the inside and things I have to change on the outside. Dr. King said we need a quantitative shift in our circumstances and a qualitative shift in our souls. So when we go into this place and you hear the voice for God speaking to you, you'll know. Where is it that the little tweaking, where is God asking you to tweak things a little? Is it in your personality or is it in your behavior? Probably if you're like most of us, it's a little bit of both. But we've talked about this before. When you're in a room like this, when we've had the kind of conversation we're having here tonight, when you are praying with people the way we're praying together tonight, whatever you find yourself saying to yourself, listen to yourself, because that's the voice for God. Let's pray. On this night, in honor of Martin Luther King and all those who in their time and in their way have lived into a prophetic vision. On this night, let us lean into ours. On this night, let us remember that he and other prophets knew fear as we know fear, knew disappointment as we know disappointment, knew painful struggle and criticism and negativity, and even dangers hurled at him and his family. And yet, he persevered. On this night, let us bear witness to the courage that others have shown, to the brilliance that has risen up in others, to the love for all humanity that has guided others. And let us remember that we too can be courageous. We too carry the potential for brilliance. And we too have a deep love for mankind. On this night in honor of Martin Luther King, let us lay down our weakness. On this night in honor of Martin Luther King, let us lay down our self-centeredness. On this night, in honor of Martin Luther King, let us too rise above our small-minded concerns and rise to the occasion that in our time we might, as he did in his, be guided by the Spirit of God to be and to do as God would have us be and do. We pray for the soul of Martin Luther King. We pray for the soul of his wife, Coretta, his daughter, Yolanda. We pray for those who walked with him and in many cases suffered with him, and in some cases died for the same cause. Let us do more than remember. Let us be transformed. Dear God, we are so tired of living small lives. We are so bored with ourselves. Let us too carry the mantle of significance and import, that in our day as in his day, we might look at the forces of injustice and stare them down, that we might stand before the forces that would dismantle democracy and stare them down, that we might gaze into the eyes of darkness and bring forth with us such light that darkness itself shall dissolve. Thank you, dear God, for the lives and the demonstration of Dr. Martin Luther King and others who showed us what it looks like, who gave us the words, explained to us the principles, and embodied them with such strength and courage that the path before us is paved with light should we choose to walk it. We too shall be surrounded by angels. We too shall have cosmic companions on our way, one of whom shall be the eternal spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, who on this day and every day resides with the council of great souls who have guided humanity from our earliest beginnings. Where he is now, may he be at peace, and may his peace in heaven be deepened by knowing on this night we heard what he said, and we too will do our best. May we be guided. May the voice for God whisper in your ear. May the presence of God illumine your path. And may the power of God give you the strength to walk it. Dear God, make us the men and women that you would have us be, that we might do as you would have us do, henceforth and forever. And so it is. Amen. Okay. Thank you again, Don. That was magnificent. Thank you. Okay, you've had your history lesson for the night, and you ate your vegetables. All right, I'm going to do some announcements, and then we can talk about anything you want to talk about, okay? I have started my Love America tour. And I will be speaking this week. I was in Richmond, Virginia, and I was in Austin, and I was in Houston. It was just wonderful being with all of you who were there in those places. Thank you for coming. This week, on Friday, I will be in Las Vegas, Nevada. And on Saturday, we'll also be in Las Vegas, Nevada, talking about Tears to Triumph. So Healing the Soul of America, the Love America Tour will be Friday night in Las Vegas, and then Saturday will be the Tears to Triumph about spirituality and depression. Now, next week, I will be here, of course, God willing, as my mother would say, on Tuesday night, but next Wednesday night, I will be at the ABC Deepak home base with New York's Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, in our Integrative Politics series. So I think that should be very interesting. That's next Wednesday night. I think it's at 7:30. That's at ABC. Also, I will be in Oklahoma City on the Love America Tour on February 25th, and at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee on February 27th. Also, remember, we are starting our democracy calls. They will be just free calls that will be later turned into podcasts, starting on Sunday night, February 11th. At 9:30 our time, East Coast time, 6:30 on the West Coast time. More of that will be posted, of course, on the loveamericatour.com as well as Marianne.com, where it will be this continuation of the conversation about the intersection of consciousness and politics. For those of you who will be served by my reading the workbook of the Course in Miracles and having that delivered into your inbox every day, you can do that. You can find the 365 days of Course in Miracles lessons on Marianne.com. I will be here every Tuesday in January, and then starting in February, we will be here the first and the third Tuesdays. Los Angeles, I will be back at the Saban on February 12th. And if you haven't been here before and you're not on my mailing list, I hope you will sign. And books and CDs and all of that is in the front there and in the back. And I want to thank the wonderful volunteers and others, John and Jennifer, and others helping. Excellent. Okay, what do you want to talk about? Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Just wanted to make a statement as far as clergy.
Clergy.
That I wish that every clergy person in this country would read the letter you just read.
Well, I think many do, and many did. I mean,
but a lot, I find, are fearful of like giving refuge to the DACA kids, for example.
What?
The DACA.
Oh, yeah.
Because they consider it, maybe illegal.
Right. Well, that's a big thing happening today, of course.
And I wish they had the courage to...
Yeah. Immigration, DACA, travel ban. There are so many issues now, and race, obviously, racial issues. There are so many issues today where we're broiling up with the same contest and struggle that other generations before us have. And you're right, in the cases that you're talking about, it's about personal courage at the end of the day, isn't it? Right. I talk a lot in my Love America Tour about the difference between being anti-slavery and being an abolitionist. Anti-slavery would just have meant you didn't agree with slavery and you would never live in one of those states and, you just thought it was crazy. That didn't move the needle for one slave. But when you cross that psychological, emotional, and spiritual bridge from anti-slavery to abolitionist, you move into not on my watch. And that's really where we are in America today. Most people, I do think a majority of Americans get, we got some serious problems on our hands. The question is, what will we do about it this year? Especially with the midterms coming up. And that's really the issue of our time, as it's been the issues of other times. Not just that we see what's going on, but that we're willing to do what we are called to do regarding what's going on. And the good news is, midterms, 2018. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first, thank you so much for this very inspirational history lesson. It was incredible. But I don't know if people are aware that this Saturday there is another Women's March happening in New York and across the country. It starts on 72nd Street in Central Park West at 11 o'clock, 11 a.m. And it should be, if all of you come, a huge event. So please do come, as many as you can.
You know, I'm going to be in Las Vegas, and is Wendy in here? She told me that the women in Las Vegas didn't get the permit. I don't know. That's what she told me. I don't know if that's true. But obviously the whole point, the power of the Women's March last year really lay in the fact that it wasn't just New York, Washington, Los Angeles, et cetera, but places all over the country and in other places of the world.
Yeah, just look, Women's March 2018.
Did you tell me that they didn't get the... How could the city not give them the permit to what? If you're in Las Vegas, do whatever you're supposed to do. I don't know. Thank you, ma'am, for that information. Okay, who's next? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm interested in getting your point of view on the contrast between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X in regards to their approach or their purpose.
Well, there was a time, you know, there's a lot of conversation about that because Malcolm X in his lifetime did change about Martin Luther King. He did say some disparaging things about Martin Luther King. He clearly did not understand the deeper power of nonviolence and felt, you know, said disparaging things about King. That he was, you know, just, I think he even called him a house slave or something, you know, that he was just going along with the white man and we had to take direct violent action. But they both, Malcolm X definitely changed in his lifetime and ended up admitting that his views on Martin Luther King had changed. I mean, it was no different than today. You know, there's so much going on. People have views and also people change. And people grow, but they certainly did. I think that there was a lot of misunderstanding at certain points. A lot of people thought he was violent when he wasn't violent, and a lot of people thought he was weak when he wasn't weak. Nonviolence is not a weak political philosophy. But, you know, God knows you see that in America today. I mean, I certainly see that. You know, there's a term in AA, contempt prior to investigation. It is so easy to just look at one thing a person does or one thing a person says and think you know what it stands for. So, yes, Malcolm X at one point would have been deemed someone who felt that King's emphasis on nonviolence was a weak response and that violence was necessary, but he himself changed in his life, according to the historical record of everything I've read. Who is next? And we can talk about anything you want to talk about. I don't want you to feel like we have to get all heavy and stuff. Okay? Anybody have anything back there? And then I can go to some of the written ones too. This lady right here. Hi, Sarah. How are you? And somebody over there. Yes.
Oh, me first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So this is a Course in Miracles question. Mm-hmm. I've been studying for 5.5 months. Mm-hmm. I've been doing the workbook. And just as a bit of background, I've been a personal assistant in New York City for 20 years. I've loved the work. I love serving. I've worked with some wonderful people. I think I'm pretty good at my job. At the same time, I feel called to work on a personal project that I started in 2013, which is a novel that's loosely based on a 7-year marriage that I had that kind of changed my life. And what the Course in Miracles says, as you've often reminded us, is look at the crucifixion, but do not dwell on it. Mm-hmm. And I feel conflicted about continuing with this book because in some ways I still feel like I'm kind of in the pain of it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, because I think of A Course in Miracles and, you know, watching you live stream, being here, I'm starting to see how beautiful an experience it was, as painful as it was. Right. And so that's giving me the courage to think about going back into the book that I really, really want to write. Right. I feel like it's really there. But I'm concerned that I might get myself into too much darkness when I'm just right now moving into the light. So
Well,
I just, not that you have the answer, but just guidance.
You will have to find that out yourself. You know, if you can, I remember talking to a singer once about how, I said, you've sung so much from the crucifixion, now sing from the resurrection. And we had a long conversation about that. That was great. It was Bonnie Raitt, actually. Because she does, I mean, some of those love songs, I mean, nobody can speak from the pain and speak our pain and name our pain greater than Bonnie can. But when you have lived it and you have come to some level of you've moved yourself into the resurrection, then you can go back into it and speak from a place that does not hurt you, because you're not reenacting it. It's in your cells enough that you can speak to it, speak from it, sing from it, create from it, and other people know you've been there, and other people can be touched, because only somebody who's been there can sing like that. Only someone who's been there can talk like that. But you know, there's those 3 days between the crucifixion in everybody's life, whatever those 3 days represent. And usually you're not ready to tell your story until you yourself have reached the resurrection point. And you'll know that. You'll know if, when you open your computer or have your writing pad, you'll know whether writing about it takes you into some temporary darkness, but you know that this is good because there's the overriding message of love and possibility. And you'll know if, no, this is taking me down, I can't do this.
And yes, and I feel like not only when I get to that place, and I don't know when it is, maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it's, in a couple months, maybe it's next year, I don't know. But I feel like when I start to do that, the actual experience of what happened in those 7 years in my marriage will be transformed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
And
that's what
the
all
beauty
creative effort is
of it,
about.
of writing about it.
Yeah, you're the first, and also, in anytime you write a book or do anything creative, if it's not surprising you and amazing you, and it's like when in the book, no, this was Hemingway who said, if the story stops writing itself, put the pencil down. Unless it's in any kind of creative work, if it's not kind of working through you and happening to you, then it can't touch the audience, because it's not going to be that way for them.
Right.
You'll know.
Right.
You'll know. People like Picasso was very much of the paradigm of the tortured artist, and he felt that the artist had to suffer themselves in order to be a great artist. And one of the perplexities and conundrums for Picasso was the fact that he felt that Matisse was the greatest painter, and Matisse was happy. And all those guys at that time were all about being the tortured artist, and Matisse was like, I don't know, I love my wife, I've got a happy family, I don't know what you are. And Picasso couldn't understand it. How can he be so happy? I couldn't understand that. So some people seem to live out the tortured artist, and some people feel that they've reached to a place where, we all know that famous story about, no, we don't all know it, but many of you probably know the famous story, Laurence Olivier and Dustin Hoffman, who were in that movie, I think it was Marathon Man. And one day, I don't know exactly what he was doing, Dustin Hoffman was running around the block 16 times and putting himself through all this horrible stuff, getting ready, method actor, getting ready for the scene. And Laurence Olivier said, what are you doing? And Dustin Hoffman said, well, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. And Laurence Olivier said, have you tried acting?
Marianne, I just wanted to share something. Martin Luther King was someone that got introduced to me at a really young age. Actually, I read a biography.
Wait, you said you wrote a biography of Martin Luther King?
No, I read a biography
Okay.
In the 4th grade.
In the 4th grade?
Yeah.
That's about when you should.
Yeah. And what I took away from tonight's service, that I think is in all of us, is that we're connected to, engineered in us as tribal beings, the human rights. And I think that each one of us, as we step into our spiritual journey, part of our spirituality is connected to this human experience, or the spiritual experience, but we feel these human rights atrocities that are happening in other countries or happening locally. So I think the call to action is, just as we step into our spiritual journey, is like, what are the human rights issues that align with our souls on the deepest level that we want to get behind? It might be some genocide in Rwanda, or something local. Like, for me, homelessness was a nonprofit that I got involved in, and the point is that it's easy to go, oh, there's a lot of other homeless charities that are out there. But when you investigate into a human rights issue that you really care about, you start to see that there's corruption or toxic charity that's trying to address maybe a human rights issue that you're passionate about. And that's where I think the call to action for each of us as human beings in this pivotal time is to just continue to step into that spiritual journey and get connected to, the source and the human rights issue that might align with you, because that pulls you forward to take that, direct action like Martin Luther King's talking about. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, how each one of us can kind of step into that leader that we are, that enlightened leader that lies within us that is often not awake yet.
Well, that's a couple of things that I said earlier. First of all, the line from King, which is that we need quantitative changes in our circumstances and qualitative changes in our souls. It's very much a both-and thing. It's external political change and internal spiritual change. It's both. It's not either or. And also, before we did the prayer tonight, I talked about how each of us would be led by the voice for God within us. Sometimes it might be something that no one else could possibly imagine its significance. Something, a little tweaking of an attitude, little tweaking of a behavioral pattern that nobody else could possibly know. But when you hear it, you know, that is what's stopping me. I don't want to speak my truth, or I don't want to do that. I don't want to get political on my Instagram page, or whatever it is. So from a Course in Miracles perspective, when it comes to the individual guidance, we are all given individual instruction by what the Course in Miracles refers to as the internal teacher, or the Holy Spirit. God doesn't tell me what you're supposed to do. God doesn't tell you what I'm supposed to do. From a Course in Miracles perspective, it is that idea that each of us will be told. And if you have a particular passion about something, that's a sign. That's the particular issue. Some people are so passionate about animals. Some people are so passionate about food. Some people are so food supply issues. Some people are so passionate about sex trafficking. So sometimes it's a particular dharmic instruction that you feel. Sometimes it has to do with your own incarnation. Obviously, if you're an African American, that there is a particular sense of where your responsibilities and your sense of your own ancestors, or if you're Jewish, or if you're Hispanic, or whatever it is, where you stand within your people and you remember that's a very powerful issue. So some of it is individual, but I think politically, and as I mentioned earlier about the higher consciousness community, we and the dominant psychotherapeutic paradigm too has completely fostered this very self-referenced attitude in relation to personal pain. For instance, we have a psychotherapeutic paradigm which has you go into therapy and the therapist says, well, what's been happening in your life that's causing you pain? So we need, as the higher consciousness movement now begins to pervade that, we begin to realize that a lot of our personal pain is based on larger social and political realities. And just addressing it on the issue of your personal pain is very dangerous, not only because it doesn't give you real problem-solving option, but also it keeps you from the power and the necessity for collective action with others who realize that this is not just what's happening in your life or your life or your life, it's what's happening in our life. So, for instance, a woman goes and she's talking to her therapist, why are you depressed? Well, I'm depressed because I had to go back to work so soon, and I wanted to be with my baby longer. Well, it's not just her pain. There's a bigger issue here, and that has to do with the fact that we are one of only 2 advanced democracies that doesn't have paid parental leave. and so forth. And all of the economic despair. So many of the things that people go to therapy to talk about, things happening in the home, that really are derived from the fact that there's so much economic pressure and so much economic stress, which of course has larger collective seeds and causality. And that's why I think it's important that all of us see politics as a collective assignment. So you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. But it's like when I was, many years ago, I lived in San Francisco when I was young, and I lived in a house, and several people lived in the house. And, you know, everybody had their own room, and everybody was doing their own thing. But then we had to have some house meetings, because when it had to do with what was happening on the cement was broken on the driveway, we had to have a house meeting. If the roof was leaking, we had to have a house meeting. And that's what politics is. Those are the issues that all of us have to be concerned with. So this turning away from politics in the name of a kind of faux spirituality is part of what we're breaking through. And I don't think that there's any model more perfect for that, of course, than Martin Luther King. Does that make sense? Ma'am, you've had your hand up for a long time. And then I think somebody back there, too. I promise I'll get to you. But this lady here seems very passionate.
Yes, you hit it on the head. I've definitely found my passion. I came here tonight, Marianne, to ask you for a miracle.
Okay.
I've been to this church before, and I know I think it's the oldest church in our country, if I'm not mistaken. And
Old church what?
I've been to this church before as well. I believe it's the oldest church in the country, if I'm not mistaken.
This isn't
Something like
the
that.
collegiate is?
Yeah,
The collegiate
yeah.
church is the oldest continuing. Wow, and that's that document in the room back there. Huh. No, what? Why are you laughing at me? There's a 1860.
I've been on a mission for several years now to create a holistic wellness expo, leveraging a relationship that I have with the AARP. And I'm finally birthing out this event. I'm driven to do it because I'm indirect caregiver for 5 family members. And I've had health issues as well, which I've dug in real deep to solve. Most recently, my grandmother was asked to draw a clock after she had an aggressive onset of dementia over a month. And she drew a pumpkin. A week and a half after following some of the integrative practitioners' advice, we had her drawing a clock again with the time.
So
I have in this expo people coming that know how to heal Alzheimer's, know how to heal dementia, know how to heal autism, know how to heal Lyme.
Okay.
And I've raised over $53,000 to create the event. Okay. It's beautifully curated. I'm proud of myself for what I've done.
Good.
And we only have 15 people signed up. It's this Saturday. I need warm bodies in the room. We were expecting 250.
So, okay, let's
And
go
we're
back
positioning it as a national campaign. So if I don't at least have the bodies in the room to create the video content from the event, I won't be able to move forward with the national campaign for a tipping point to get people to vote with their dollars. Because what we're starting to do is tying together our daily habits with our health, the health of the planet, and sustainable investing.
So, first of all, just as someone who has done some of what you're talking about,
Absolutely.
you took on a whole lot, and you can simplify a little bit here. You have a great cause, and you know, from a Course in Miracles perspective, you simply do what you are guided to do, but it's not just what you're told to do, but how you're told to do it. So you need to look at, okay, I raised $50,000. I know I have a good intent. How am I stuck 5 days before the event with 15 people signed up?
We're in shock. I've done events in Manhattan with the AARP in past where
Okay.
we sent out over 10,000 invites. I had 100 people come.
Did you put it all over Facebook ads and stuff
Yep,
like that?
we're doing all of that.
Okay.
I've got
And so who was it mainly geared to go? People who were
people
like...
in their 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And then also, I've done it purposefully at
Okay.
a congregation to
All right.
bring it to the people.
Okay.
Schools
So-
in the area as well.
So
Parents.
I invite you, first of all, say where it is. And it's here in Manhattan?
It's actually the first one will be in White Plains.
In White Plains. And is it also live streamed?
It will be live streamed.
Okay, so look, because there are other people who will be able to see it on live stream. So tell the room where it will be and what time.
It's at Rosedale Avenue, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation in
At
White
what
Plains,
time?
from 9:30 to 5
On what day?
on Saturday,
Okay, this Saturday.
This Saturday.
Which is what, the 20th?
which is the 20th.
Okay. And it's an expo, wellness for the aging population?
No, it's cross-generational. So parents from the schools will also be there. We'll have a talk on vaccine safety, for example.
But it's a health expo, a wellness
That's
expo.
right.
Okay.
Physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and financial.
Okay.
So anything from blockchain to the brain.
So it's just a wellness expo.
Yes, yes, it's quite
They
unique
exist.
in that there's
Okay.
actually people who heal Alzheimer's there.
So, all right, so I invite you to put the information on my Facebook page, and anybody who is interested, go and look
Specifically,
there.
I wanted to ask for a connection potentially to the church. We'd be willing to, the tickets are a $35 or $50 value, and there's massage all day, a styling lounge.
Okay, and?
Chef Ronaldo, who's going to be there cooking. He's from Chopped. And I would love to be able to give out 50 tickets to people or something, to get 50 people there, even bus them up there.
That's great. Okay,
that's
so what
I'm
is your
looking for.
name?
My name is Danielle Campisi.
Danielle, and Danielle will be standing right there by that door if anybody is interested afterwards, and she will talk to you about that. Okay? Very good. Okay, I got to go to this lady because she had her hand. I promise I'll come back to you. Okay, yes, ma'am.
To purchase it, to register for free and purchase a ticket with the coupon DanceWell100.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I have a course-related question.
Okay.
Thank you for tonight.
Thank you.
And this is my 4th year doing exercises of the course, and I feel like I'm starting to finally get disciplined about it. One place I get tripped up is spiritual superiority.
Spiritual superiority. Okay. In what way?
I think just separating others and feeling like because I'm doing this work.
Yeah. So when you say you get tripped up by it, if you know that in what way do you get tripped up by it? Because I think on one hand, a sense of spiritual superiority is a shadow of the spiritual seeker. I think we all go there sometimes. Sense that because we do the Course in Miracles, or we read whatever we read, that somehow we've got a little more going on spiritually. Yeah. I think that all of us have seen that in ourselves at times. I know I certainly have. But when you say you get tripped up, what do you mean you get tripped up?
I feel like it's how I'm blocking it's where fear comes in.
Absolutely. One of the things you've heard me say here probably before is I know in my own life, probably if there's any piece of advice, which if I remember and give it to myself 90% of the time it does the trick, it's the following. Marianne, get over yourself. And anytime you are into your quote-unquote self, with a small s, it will engender fear. So a sense of superiority or inferiority. This is the thing. If you're closer to success, you're going to have fear of success. If you're closer to failure, you're going to have fear of failure. Your mind will use whatever it can use to make you feel either better or worse than other people. It's a seesaw. The ego doesn't care whether you're feeling superior or feeling inferior, as long as you're feeling separate. That's the message of the Course in Miracles. So you're on a constant seesaw. The message of the Course is you are no different than anyone else. We're all special, and none of us are special. And there might be an area where you have all the book learning, but somebody else has none of the book learning that you have, but embodies it more than you do because they don't have the childhood wounding that you had. So the more we live with something like the Course, the last thing the Course would want is for anybody to think that because we do the Course in Miracles that we've got it more going on. Does that make sense? It's like sometimes how people act about born-again Christians. I've heard people say, I just can't stand those born-again Christians. And I'll say, why? And they'll say, they are so judgmental. Right? So the message of the Course is always about pointing at ourselves. And it's a lot easier said than done because the ego is very, very sly. Very sly. but the work is always on ourselves. So sense of spiritual superiority is definitely one of the issues. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
I listen to you every week from the live stream.
Where do you live?
Orlando.
Orlando.
So I raised knowing that when you do something wrong, and it's the law of cause and effect, right? You did something wrong, and then you get punished. So the Course in Miracles, like I've been studying it, the release of guilt, and where the Son of God is guiltless, right? How does it relate with the law of cause and effect?
Okay, so let's talk about that. The law of cause and effect, the Course in Miracles says, is the main organizing principle. That doesn't use the term organizing principle, but the philosophy is that the law of cause and effect was instituted by God for our protection. The law of cause and effect is whatever I think will take form on some level. Every thought creates form on some level. The Course in Miracles does not say that you are punished for lovelessness, but simply that God has shared all power with you. So if I think love, I will get love back. If I think and behave lovelessly, I will get the effects back of my lovelessness. That is not because God is punishing me. It is because the ego punished me. The ego is what punished me. It's not like I behaved lovelessly and then God is going to punish me by sending me to hell after I die. Quite the opposite. It was the ego that punished me by tempting me to do that, and the hell is the anxiety and depression I'm going to feel within 15 minutes and for however long it lasts for having been so stupid. God is that which then delivers you from your hell. Everybody get that, what I just said? Now, the way God saves us from hell is through a principle called the atonement. And that is that where we admit that we did it. I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. I did that. I did that. And I don't know about you, but the stupidest things I've done, I didn't wake up that morning saying, I'm going to do something really stupid today. I'm going to really self-sabotage today. I'm going to say the one thing that will make him never want to talk to me again. Whatever. You don't do that. It's the ego is very sly and insidious, and you get into a wounded place. But, you know, Buddha was born about 500 years before Jesus. And Buddha talked about action, reaction, action, reaction. And the message of Jesus is, but in a moment of grace, all karma is burned. The Catholics have confession. The Jews have Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement. In AA, a program of amends, you have to admit the nature of your wrongs, your character defects. It's very important. So it's built into the universe. The universe is infinitely merciful. So the universe is self-organizing and it's self-correcting. As long as we act out of love and think with love and act out of love, everything's fine. If we don't, all hell breaks loose. We exit the realms of that's the story of the exit from the Garden of Eden. That's when there is depression. And the Course in Miracles does use the word depression. It's not just some medical term that Big Pharma came up with in the last few years. So depression, the Course in Miracles says, is inevitable, and chaos and fear when we are outside the forces of love. The issue is the atonement. To go back to that moment, you know what you did, to get clear about where your thinking was off, get clear about where your behavior was off, and give it to God. And know that in that moment, the Holy Spirit did not guide your thoughts, did not guide your behavior. I mean, who among us can't? I mean, I've had things happen in my life. I've thought, if only I had prayed first, if only I had taken, my mother used to say, count to 5 or count to 10. How many times did you do stupid things because you were just too fast? And these days, everybody has a problem with impulse control. It's too easy to text, too easy to email, too easy to just, say things that if you didn't have a text there, you wouldn't have said it. I mean, everybody with social media and stuff, we're all like, you just say, the first thought you have is not necessarily the most noble, right? And so if we haven't meditated, if we haven't prayed, cultivation, that's why when you do physical exercise, it's giving you the musculature to move. Spiritual exercise gives us the attitudinal musculature of stillness and non-reactivity. And usually the mistakes, the loveless things we do among, those of us in just contemporary experiences, we were stressed, we were anxious. That's a problem with what's going on today. So much of the assault going on today is knocking us off our game. We're knocked off our game. There's one person I've had I get knocked off my game. There are people and circumstances, and and if you don't pray and you don't meditate, but there is no order of difficulty in miracles, and God is infinite, the universe is infinitely merciful. But that's what the atonement is. So God's not punishing you. The ego is what punished us. Now also remember, from A Course in Miracles perspective, if I behave lovelessly, this is what the Course says. God creates you in perfect love. You are a perfect being of love. Each of us is a perfect being of love. That is the truth about us. In the moment that I behave lovelessly, what happened to the loving Marianne? Well, the Course says the loving Marianne is the only real Marianne. It was not uncreated at the moment that I behaved like a jerk. The Marianne who behaved like a jerk in that moment, who said something loveless or did something loveless, was in itself an illusion of who I am, a personality fractal that emerged from my woundedness. But God himself holds the real Marianne. The atonement is a way of my acknowledging I didn't bring the real Marianne down into expression, and I atone for that. And then the Course in Miracles says, when you do that, all the consequences of your wrong behavior and your wrong decision will be undone, and you don't have to feel guilty. I mean, the atonement is such a profound principle of mercy. So that's what the Course says. Does that answer your question? You have your hand up? Yes, sir. And that's why, for those of us who are Course in Miracles students, that's why doing the workbook is so important. For those of you who are students of the Course, there's the volume 1, which is the text, volume 2, which is those workbook exercises. And the Course says that the workbook exercises are the crux of the Course. If being enlightened was as simple as knowing the intellectual principles, I would be an enlightened master. I mean, if you've read the book long enough, and if it was but it's not as simple as that. Yes.
That was brilliant, by the way.
Thank you.
So this is my first event.
Thank
And
you.
earlier you were talking about the mother who feels bad because she can't spend as much time as she wants with her kid, but that's really because on a
Yes.
social level.
Correct.
So that was like a big aha moment. And I feel like many times during the day we feel that way about different subjects. And I feel like each time we don't stop and realize what's happening, that we're tuning into a bigger issue and not doing anything about it is a missed opportunity. So that's kind of the thing that I'm taking away mostly from tonight is next time I feel that way, why do I feel that way? What am I tuning into and what am I going to do about it?
Right.
And I think that's going to help foster courage to speak up on a bigger level. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, because sometimes it is an individual issue, but sometimes it's a larger cultural issue. For instance, wealth inequality in America. You have millions and millions of Americans living in chronic economic despair. And we've seen what that has done. And out of that comes all manner of dysfunction. You have more domestic abuse. You have the fact that it's too hard for many people to have one child. Many families where both parents work is not because they want to, but because they can't make it otherwise. Like when I was growing up, my father could work and my mother stay at home. It was economically more feasible than it is for many people. So there you get, and then so you then have the children who don't have somebody at home. And you have, the statistics are there. Then you have more abuse of children and all manner of social dysfunction that emerges from that level of chronic economic despair. And so then you have, and that's why issues like, let's say, universal health care, it's not just about health care. It's about the fact that people who are always living in the stress of not knowing what I'll do if I get sick can't spread their wings, can't thrive, can't live their dreams. And then all of society is made less. And it's not just about a job or something like college loans. So you talk to a person, they think, I'm just really upset because I have these college loans to pay back. Well, there's a bigger issue just than the fact that you have these college loans. It's the fact that the government is making money off this. So it's all of us recognizing that that we have developed over the last few decades this way of looking, and sometimes we in the higher consciousness community have been part of that, keeping it very focused on the small self. And you can't always find the answer just on the level of small self, because the answer is not just that you are able to override in your life issues of economic, social, or political injustice. Right? It's like I was saying tonight, the issue isn't just that you get to escape. Right. And then you are co-opted rather than liberated. Yes, ma'am.
So if we're trying to get out of the small self and we're
Yes.
talking about miracles, is a part of the work that we're supposed to be doing waking each other up so that we can all make the atonement? Maybe
Okay.
it can't happen
All right,
otherwise.
well, you don't wake anyone else up. That would be part of the spiritual superiority. You're not trying to get a message out, you're trying to get a message in. To teach in Course in Miracles terms is to demonstrate, right? So the issue is to practice it. No, if I have a more awakened perspective, what is an awakened perspective? Awakened perspective is to know. The issue is, am I awake? Not are you awake? So let's say you say something loving to me. If you say something loving to me, it's easy for me to be awake. It's easy to be enlightened around people who do exactly what you want them to do and say exactly what you want them to say. Okay. But the issue of awakeness is, what if you don't say something beautiful to me? What if you don't say something kind to me? The issue is not, well, he's not very awake, or he wouldn't have said anything loveless. That's what the ego would say. And so it's my job to tell him he really needs to be more spiritual. That's not the Course. The Course is, well, Marianne, the real him loves you because that's all that's real. He had a childhood. So he gets triggered, and he met you because you perfectly trigger him in the place of his childhood wound. The fact that it bothers you so much that he gets triggered means that he is triggering your childhood wound. Are you with me? So the issue is for you to know that he really does love you. It's just something in this moment, he can't find his love. The issue of being awake is for you to not fall into that dream state with him, for you to remain awake. That's why the Course in Miracles says the primary responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself, not for you. If I'm to be a miracle worker here means, am I accepting the atonement? So the Course in Miracles says, I'm supposed to see everyone else's behavior as one of two things. It is either love, which obviously, if you're being loving towards me, it's not hard for me to figure out that the appropriate response is love back. But if you're not behaving with love towards me, the training of the Course is that in that moment, you couldn't remain awake to your love and feel you got your needs met, you fell asleep to who you are. For me to remain awake would be to interpret your lovelessness as a call for love. Now, by my being awake in that moment, I am refusing to see you as guilty. I'm going to sit here and know that you're beautiful and wonderful, even though you're not acting that way, which will automatically remind you that you are that wonderful. I did it out of self-interest. The Course in Miracles says, in that moment, I am doing it really not to wake you up. I'm doing it because I don't want to be at the effect of your insanity. And if I think your insanity is real, wow, she's really mean, then I will be, in my experience, at the effect of your meanness. Faith means knowing, I know this is not who you really are. So, dear God, I'm willing to see this woman. I'm willing to see her differently. I am willing to not be in this drama of what is she saying and what is she doing and how is she looking at me. I'm willing to not be there, which not only saves me from being at the effect of what you did, but in that moment automatically reminds you of who you really are. That's the Course in Miracles. Once again, easier said than done. That's why we do the workbook. You have to train your attitudinal muscles. Now, what I just said was not difficult, but it's different. It's a completely different paradigm. than the thinking that rules the world. So what I just said, it's not like hard, but it's different. It's like you have to think about it. So it's not hard, and that's why you read the text, and it's dense reading, but you get it. But still, it's that practicing it is where that workbook comes in. And relationships, the Course in Miracles says, are assignments. So we're sent some people around whom it's easy. You're nice to me is easy. Other people around whom maybe it wasn't so easy because they, like we were saying earlier, throw you off your game or whatever, and those are our teachers. So, if you haven't thrown the book across the room at least one time, I don't think you're really reading it. Yes, sir. I actually said to somebody once, I don't care what it says on a Marianne Williamson tape. To know the principle is one thing, to practice it. Yes.
Hi, Marianne. It's so nice to talk to you. I'm a student of the course. I just started part 2, actually.
The workbook?
The workbook,
okay.
Yeah. And it's just so amazing that we're talking about this right now. I feel like, okay, I just was in a relationship that I thought was so amazing because I saw it so clearly, like everything, like I was triggering him, he was triggering me. It was like, and I was so ready to give it up and like give that up and like give that wound up. And I was thinking of this principle of like, I had seen through that veil. When we met, like I had seen the perfection that was there.
Right.
And it was like magnificent, really. Like,
right, you fell in love.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so then, as our humanity was coming up and, all of that starts happening,
yep.
I wanted to only forgive, and because, of course, right, like this is the curriculum. And so I felt like there was times that I received guidance that maybe like this, like things, I needed to end things, but I wanted to forgive through that. I kept saying like, if I tweak something in the 3 dimensions, that's not going to bring me any more peace than if I just commit to piercing through, like just seeing the perfection. And I think that got so twisted, and it went on for a little too long because it was like taken by my ego, because I wanted to get something that I wanted. I wanted this relationship to work.
Mm-hmm.
So
you wanted, what was the last thing you said?
The relationship to work.
And I know what you're saying. So
I'm like, right now, I ended things a couple weeks ago, so it's like moving through that right now, and I guess like I feel like I've atoned for certain things, and I'm seeing things more clearly, and things are coming, a lot of lessons, there's so much there to learn, but I'm like, how do I find more forgiveness for myself, because I had all this forgiveness for him, and I still do. I still, don't want to go there.
And do you feel that you need forgiveness for yourself for staying too long?
No, just because I feel like so, I don't know, like it's like I've atoned, and I know that I loved, and I know that I made mistakes, but I know that it's like ultimately like they were unreal, and ultimately there was a beautiful love there, and
How long were you together?
Just a few months.
And how long? But it was deep for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how long has this since you ended it?
A couple weeks now.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
You're in process, sweetheart. So it's not going to be like immediately you have the peace you want. But you brought up so much that I really want to deconstruct some of what you said for everyone's benefit. So, what is your name?
I'm Donald. Donald.
Okay, so Donald fell in love. So a lot of traditional psychotherapeutic theory these days is that when Donald saw how gorgeous the other guy, you said, right? How gorgeous he was, how wonderful he was, that was just illusion. That's what a lot of traditional therapy says, that it was just illusion, that he saw how perfect he was, and then reality set in. The Course in Miracles says the opposite. You had a spontaneous enlightenment experience. You actually saw the truth. You pierced the veil and saw the beauty, and that's why falling in love is so intoxicating. So it's not that he was in illusion and then reality set in. It's that he had a spontaneous enlightenment experience. It's like the Greek mythology of Cupid's arrows. If Cupid's arrows didn't strike you, how would you know, stop, there's lessons to be learned with this person? And then what happened from a Course perspective is not that then reality set in, but then the illusions of the world set in. Because neither one of you are perfect people. Now, this is an issue in the Course in Miracles that's the difference between what the Course calls a special relationship and a holy relationship. In a special relationship, one person's issues come up because that's the purpose of the relationship, is for it to trigger your issues so that the magnifying glass is put on them. You're in a relationship with someone who says, I cannot stand that you do that. And if you have 2 or 3 relationships with someone who says, I cannot stand that you do that, you start to go, wow, maybe I want to transform in that area. In a special relationship, the ego is just looking for someone who has no issues. And then the ego in the special relationship says, if you have that issue or I have that issue, I have to leave you, and rejects the other person. The holy relationship is where we understand, as you said, that things are coming up in order that we might both be healed. If my issues don't come up, he says in the Course in Miracles, I cannot take from you what you will not release to me. So if my personality defects don't come up in the relationship, and I'm not called on them, then I don't go through, I gotta change, dear God, change me. I can't act that way. And in a holy relationship, one person, and it's both people have issues, and so in a holy relationship, the person who has the issue is willing to see it and being willing to change. The other person practices mercy and compassion, and that's how we heal. But there's free will. And often in relationships, one person says, I want to stay with this and have it a holiization process. And another person says, I can't do this anymore, I'm out of here. And you don't get to decide for the other person, always. Now, you sound like you had a real love affair. That stuff comes up. That's where stuff comes up. And it often, not just for you, Donald, but I promise you, for everybody here and everybody watching, it takes more than a couple weeks to find your peace again. You know? And some of the, it's the irony, and the painful irony, is that often with the people we have loved the most, we have behaved the most badly. It's awful to have to face that in yourself. You know, that you showed, to the person that you would most want to impress, you showed your worst self. But that's what was happening at the deepest level, and the lessons that you had to learn. And like you said, you started practicing love. You were shown a lot of things. You were shown that actually you were doing the loving thing just to get what you wanted, and all the lessons that you learned. So I'm only getting my information from you, but it sounds like this is grown-up love. This is grown-up love. It goes deep and painful often. That's the flip side of the glory and the ecstasy of it, is that it brings up those deeper, darker corners. And that's why it's so transformative, but often so painful. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, one more. I don't know if I have. I'm going to ask you now, because it's so late, only keep your hand up if you think it's really important that it be tonight, unless it's just a prayer request. Okay, this lady here.
Thank you. Very briefly, just beautiful, beautiful talk tonight by you, and
Thank
so
you.
Just very moving. Just a very positive short story. My mother today actually said that she was finally just disgusted with our president, and just had enough, and just couldn't stand any more of what he had to say. And I was just so grateful and so relieved.
Why did you vote for him?
Yeah, and it's been very difficult for me because I do a lot of social justice related work. And I think it was probably because he was talking about Africa, and I've lived in Africa for many years, and I'm moving back to Africa. So maybe it was the latest round of incredible things that he said. So I just wanted to share it as, you know, as something hopeful that people can wake up. My fear now is that, I mean, she just tends to waver back and forth, and sometimes based on what other people think, like her husband, who's kind of a redneck, but is a redneck. But I think it just provides some insight into the possibility that people can change, and maybe how, and I had a sort of a question linked to it, which is, you know, it's really, how can we both, as the Course in Miracles suggests, you know, work within our own selves to be our best self and leader and so forth, and where's the fine line between too much advocacy or what kind of teaching, you know, and helping people stay on becoming on a more conscious path.
Well, once again, it's the work on ourselves, and as Dr. King said in the letter to the Birmingham jail, self-purification. This is very much an issue for our time. A smug, self-righteous, vicious left-winger is no less dangerous to the emotional fabric of this country than is a smug, self-righteous, vicious right-winger. I told the story, I think, last week of my girlfriend is a Trump supporter, and I put something on Instagram just trying to support her with some skincare product, and I joked that she had voted for Trump, but one thing we can all agree on is collagen, you know, and I thought it was cute and breezy. And well, the attacks on her were, and on me for even being friends with her, were so vicious that I ended up taking it down. Now, think about this. If we are that lacking in magnanimity, who among us, let's say somebody did vote for the president and is changing their mind. If we just make them feel like they're horrible people, you know, that's what are we? And Martin Luther King said you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. So any level of superiority. And also, I think with some people, you know, it's not for us to judge. You know, there's a lot of talk about that right now, about, well, if you would even vote for him, you knew he was misogynist, you knew he was a racist, you knew he was this, you knew he was that. From where I'm coming from, among other things, I think some people were in such economic despair that they felt, I don't care that he's a racist and I don't care that he's a misogynist, he might help me. And who am I to judge? You know, it's not, and who am I to even judge right now, even positing? You know, that's the stuff that doesn't serve. So I think as we enter in this year, we want to always do our best to dwell in divine neutrality. I don't think you can have too much advocacy. This is a time of critical decision-making in our country. This is a time, I mean, I just got back. I did 2 benefit fundraisers for progressive congressional candidates in the last week, one in North Carolina and one in Austin, Texas, and I will continue to, and I hope we all are doing what we can to support candidates that we think stand for a real change, if that's where your heart is. But the whole principle of nonviolence is that the end is inherent in the means. That's what Gandhi said, that's what Dr. King said. So if I'm an angry, judgmental person, I'm not going to bring forth the world that I want. And your mother was giving you the space emotionally to say that and to make that change in your presence. And none of this, I told you so, none of this, whatever we have. So I saw that with my girlfriend, the viciousness of the people who were deriding her character because she voted for Trump. And they don't know her. You know, they don't know her, they just don't know her. And the assumptions being made about her character were just absolutely incorrect. That make sense? All right. Okay, one more real quick, this gentleman, and then we've got to close because it's late. Yes, sir. Hi.
Prayer request. My mom's 93. I've been coming to you in LA, and I've been here in May taking care of her, and she's at the hospital, and my brother's there right now. And, you know, wondering whether to take her off the BiPAP machine,
wow.
and whether she's suffering or not. She's fought so hard and had many miracles surviving. So I just want, her name is Jean, and just
Jean,
prayer.
we'll
Yeah.
be glad to pray
Thank
for her
you.
right
Thank
now.
you.
Okay, please put Jean on the prayer list. Okay? All right. We'll say our final prayer now. I want to thank all of you very much for being here. It was an honor that you were here. Hi, Marie. Okay. We all cool? Is that cool with everybody that we didn't do it anymore? Okay? All right, thank you. All right. All right. Let's pray. Dear God, as we leave each other's presence tonight, we take this moment to deeply wish each other well. And we send our love not only to each other, but to all the world. We take this moment to put into God's hands our own burdens and fears, our hopes, our dreams, our questions, and our decisions to be made. We pray for Rose, Christopher, Linda, Butterfly Love, John Pereira, Paul, Charlotte, Jennifer, Peter, Judith, Amy, Diana, Annette, the people of Hawaii, the people of Montecito, California, Joswant, Anthony, Marianne, Nicholas, Rose, Paul, Brian, Edia, Marar, Melania, and Jean. And we pray that Jean's family be guided, dear God, her son and others, that they might feel in their hearts the wisdom of this moment. And now go forth in confidence and go forth in peace. For there are angels to your left and there are angels to your right. There are angels in front of you and angels behind you. There are angels above you and angels below. There is a path of light unfolding in front of you, created by God Himself. With each instant, seek to live within the light of His mercy, His compassion, and His forgiveness. At any moment of doubt or confusion, put your hand in front of you as would a small child, seeking the hand of an elder brother to guide you back to the path, and should you request it, to remain with you upon it. This is no idle fantasy. He is here. And so together, blessing the world and all living things upon it, together we say, amen. God bless you, everybody. Thank you.